In the quiet hilltop village of Hearthville, where chimneys sang soft notes and rooftops wore snow like cozy hats, lived a little girl named Miri and her grandma Luma. Their cottage sat at the edge of the village, wrapped in ivy and years of laughter. Inside, the fireplace always crackled, and the kitchen always smelled of cinnamon and honey. Each winter, when the first snowflake touched the ground and the wind danced through the trees like a sleepy tune, Miri and Grandma began their special tradition, making the blanket of 1,000 hugs. It wasn't just a blanket. It was a quilt stitched from memories, love, and old bits of family stories. They would pull a big wooden basket out from under the bed, filled with scraps of cloth saved from all sorts of days, happy days, silly days, even some teary ones. This one, Grandma would say, holding up a square of blue flannel, was from the pajamas your papa wore when he was your age. He never wanted to take them off. Miri would giggle and sew the patch in carefully, her small fingers moving slowly but surely. Some pieces were soft and faded like Grandma's old scarf from her dancing days. Others were bold and bright, like the yellow apron Mama wore while baking her famous jam pies. There was even a patch from the baby blanket that used to wrap Miri when she was just a giggling bundle. Every patch, Grandma whispered, is a hug that stays. Even when the arms can't reach anymore. They sat by the fire each evening, sewing side by side, their knees covered with the growing quilt. Sometimes Grandma hummed old lullabies. Sometimes they sipped warm tea and told stories. Miri liked the ones where Grandma rode bikes with no hands or sneaked cookies before dinner. One snowy night, Miri added a secret patcha small heart, cut from her favorite pink dress with tiny silver stars. She kissed it and sewed it near the middle, hoping Grandma would find it later. For you, she whispered, a piece of my heart. As days passed, the blanket grew heavier with love. Miri would curl up in it when Grandma went to fetch more thread. She'd close her eyes and feel the stories wrap around her like sleepy songs. Outside, the world was frozen white. But inside their little cottage, warmth bloomed like spring flowers. The hug blanket, still unfinished, already seemed to hold the whole family inside its seams, laughing, dancing, baking, dreaming. Will it ever be finished? Miri asked one night, her voice sleepy. Grandma smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. One day, my love, but we'll always find one more hug to sew. Miri nodded and yawned. In her lap, the quilt shimmered faintly in the firelight, as if it knew a secret she had yet to learn. The next morning, the snow fell heavier than before. It danced in slow spirals outside the window, covering the garden in a soft, sleepy white. Miri pressed her nose to the glass and drew a heart with her finger. Today will be perfect for sewing, she whispered. But something felt different in the cottage. The fire had burned too low, the singing chimneys were quiet, and Grandma Luma had not come down for breakfast. Miri climbed the stairs with the quilt folded in her arms. She pushed open Grandma's door gently, like opening a book she didn't want to wrinkle. There, in bed under a soft blue blanket, lay Grandma pale and still, her eyes closed, her smile faded like a forgotten tune. Grandma? Miri whispered. No answer. A few moments later, the doctor came with his long scarf and kind eyes. He listened with a little silver drum to Grandma's chest. He looked at Miri and said softly, She just needs rest, little one. Her heart is tired. Keep things gentle and warm for her, all right? Miri nodded. But inside, her chest felt like it had dropped a pebble into a deep well. That afternoon, the cottage felt too quiet. No humming, no laughter, no stories floating around the fire. Miri sat by herself with the quilt. The basket of cloth scraps was beside her, and her small fingers picked through it slowly. She found the patch with the stars from Grandpa's scarf. She remembered how Grandma used to dance in the kitchen with it wrapped around her shoulders. She added it to the quilt carefully. Every patch is a hug, she murmured, even if it's sewn with tears. Miri kept sewing, even though her hands were cold. The thread tangled more than usual. The scissors felt heavier, but she didn't stop. She remembered what Grandma had said, even when the arms can't reach anymore. She sewed in a piece from Mama's old tablecloth, the one they used for birthdays, a bit of ribbon from her first school award, a corner from her baby pillow. And when she had no more scraps to pick, she stood up, wrapped her arms around her neck, and pulled off the scarf Grandma had knitted for her last winter. It was soft and pink, like warm clouds. Her favorite. She kissed it and cut the smallest, softest part from one end. She sewed it right into the heart of the quilt, near her secret star patch. "For you, Grandma," she whispered. "A hug from now." That night, she lay beside the fireplace, the quilt curled around her like a promise. The flames glowed low, but the blanket felt warm like arms around her, even though Grandma was upstairs, sleeping and still. Outside, the wind howled gently through the trees. The house didn't hum, but the quilt, heavy with hugs and memory, shimmered faintly once more. And Miri, though lonely and small, felt strong, because love doesn't sleep when people do. It keeps stitching itself into every thread. Miri woke before the sun. Her fingers were still tangled in the quilt, and her cheek pressed against a patch that smelled faintly of lavender and cinnamon. The fire had gone out sometime in the night, and the cottage was cold, but the blanket still held its warmth soft, steady, and deep. She sat up slowly, blinking at the soft light pushing through the frost-laced windows. A quiet thought tiptoed through her mind. The blanket feels full. She looked at it spread across the floor. So many colors, so many shapes. Circles, stars, flowers, stripes. Some patches were wrinkled like old smiles. Others were smooth and shiny. It felt like looking at all the days she'd ever lived, sewn together like puzzle pieces. Then, something caught her eye. Right at the center, where she'd stitched the piece from her pink scarf, the fabric shimmered, not like silver thread or shiny buttons. This was different. A warm golden glow came from it, like sunlight hiding inside the cloth. She touched it gently. It wasn't hot, just alive. Miri sat back, heart fluttering. Could it be? Could the blanket really feel? She remembered Grandma's words, "Sew with love." And she had. Every patch was sewn with love, some with smiles, some with tears, some with deep wishes whispered under breath. Maybe that's what made the blanket glow. Maybe that's what made it more than cloth and thread. She folded it neatly and carried it up the creaky stairs, careful not to let any part drag. Grandma's room was quiet. A beam of soft morning light landed on her pale cheek. Her hands were still. Her eyes stayed closed. Miri walked to the bed and placed the quilt gently over her. She smoothed it out so that the glowing patch rested near Grandma's heart. Then she sat beside the bed, holding Grandma's hand, small inside her own. A minute passed, then two, and then Grandma's eyelids fluttered. Her fingers twitched ever so slightly. Her lips moved. "Warm," she whispered. Miri leaned in. "What, Grandma?" Grandma's eyes opened slowly. Two pale blue ponds. She smiled soft, sleepy, but real. "I felt every hug," she said. "Every single one." Miri's throat caught. Tears blinked into her eyes, but they weren't heavy like before. They were light and full, like rain that helps flowers grow. "You came back," Miri whispered. "I was never far," Grandma said, brushing a strand of hair from Miri's cheek. "Just resting in the blanket you made." They sat quietly for a long time, wrapped in warmth deeper than fire. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, the cottage felt like summer in their hearts. That night, Grandma came downstairs again, slow but smiling. They ate soup and bread, and the chimneys hummed once more. The blanket now stayed on Grandma's bed every night, and though the glowing patch never sparkled quite as brightly again, its warmth never faded, because love, real love once sewn, stays stitched forever. Spring came early to Hearthville that year. The snow melted like soft whispers, slipping down rooftops and into puddles that reflected the sky. The village woke from its winter sleep with songs of birds and fresh bread rising from ovens. Miri and Grandma Luma now spent mornings on the porch, sipping tea and watching the buds bloom on their crooked old tree. The quilt often rested across their laps, no longer needed for warmth but still held close just in case. One breezy afternoon, Miri looked up from her sketchbook. "Grandma," she asked, "do you think other people need hugs like this?" Grandma smiled. "Always. Some people carry invisible emptiness in their hearts, and a hug reel, or remembered, can help stitch it whole." Miri nodded, quiet for a moment. Then she stood up with a determined spark in her eyes. "Then we should sew more." And just like that, a new idea was born, the Little Patches of Light project. Each week, Miri and Grandma made small squares from leftover fabric. They stitched them with tiny hearts, stars, or cheerful words like hope, brave, or remember love. Each patch was sewn by hand, sometimes with a giggle, sometimes with a song. They tucked little messages inside. "This is a hug, even if we've never met." Miri began leaving them around the village. One on Mr. Tallow's doorstep when his cat went missing. One in Miss Penny's coat pocket at the bakery. Another at the park bench where a boy often sat alone after school. Soon, people began to notice. The patches made their way into wallets, coat linings, even under pillows. Some villagers began sewing their own. Bright cloth hearts hung from fences, trees, and bus stops. Children brought them to school. Elders gave them out at the market. No one knew exactly where the idea started, but everyone felt its warmth. The quilt in Grandma's home stayed the same soft, full of memories, gently glowing with quiet love. But now, its hugs had spread like sunshine, patch by patch, through all of Hearthville. One rainy afternoon, a traveler knocked at their door. He wore a long coat soaked from the storm and held a tiny, faded fabric square in his hand. "I don't know who made this," he said, voice low and kind, "but I found it weeks ago when I was at my lowest. It gave me strength. It reminded me I wasn't alone." Grandma Luma placed a hand over her heart. Miri stepped forward and nodded. "You can keep it. That's what hugs are for." He smiled, tears sparkling in his eyes, and tucked the patch into his chest pocket like a treasure. That night, as the wind whispered outside and the rain tapped gently on the windows, Miri sat by the fire, the big quilt wrapped around her shoulders. She thought of all the patches out there resting in drawers, clutched in hands, warming hearts, and she whispered softly, "You're not just a blanket anymore. You're a beginning." The quilt shimmered, ever so faintly. Because love, once stitched, finds a way to travel one hug at a time. Years passed in Hearthville like pages in a gentle book. Miri grew taller. Her hair turned wavier. She learned to climb trees with one hand and carry teacups with the other. She still visited Grandma Luma's cottage every day after school, though now she did most of the cooking and helped Grandma up the stairs when her knees felt stiff. The quilt, the blanket of 1,000 hugs, lay folded on the wooden bench beside the fire. Its colors had faded just a little, like memories held gently too long, but it was still beautiful, still full, still warm. One day, Grandma didn't come downstairs. Not like before. This time, there was no whisper of breath under the blanket, no gentle smile, only the sunlight falling through the curtains, soft and golden like her voice. Miri sat beside her for a long time, the quilt across her knees. She didn't cry right away. She just listened to the silence, to the stillness, to the slow memory of every story they'd sewn together. Later that evening, when the sky turned violet and the wind pressed gently at the window panes, Miri placed the quilt over Grandma, one last time. "You gave me more than hugs," she whispered. "You gave me the thread to sew the world kinder." The village came to say goodbye. Some brought flowers. Others brought their own little heart patches, worn and frayed, once tucked into pockets and now carried like sacred things. Everyone, it seemed, had been touched by one of Grandma's hugs, 7, if they hadn't known where it came from. That night, after the house was quiet, Miri sat alone by the fireplace. She pulled out the basket from beneath Grandma's bedstill, filled with scraps of fabric, half-sewn stars, and little notes. At the very bottom, wrapped in a ribbon, was a letter. "My dearest Miri, if you're reading this, I've gone to rest where hugs never run out. But remember, this quilt isn't just made of fabric. It's made of Every time we laughed, cried, or held hands through worry. Now it's your turn. Sew new patches, share new hugs. And when you miss me most, wrap yourself in our story. I'll always be there in every thread, with love that never ends. Grandma. Miri didn't cry right away. She laid the letter across the glowing heart patch and kissed it. Then, she did something new. She added a square of her own bright blue with tiny golden stars from the dress she'd worn to Grandma's last birthday. She stitched it into the very corner of the quilt and whispered, "This is chapter 2. In the seasons that followed, Miri taught other children to sew. She shared her story at the town library. Together, they made a new quilt, the blanket of forever hugs that grew and grew, hung in the town hall, and stretched across walls like a tapestry of love. The original quilt stayed in Miri's home. On rainy days, she'd curl beneath it and feel not just warmth, but presence, a whisper, a glow, 1,000 silent I love yous sewn into place. Because love doesn't end when someone leaves. It lives on patch by patch, hug by hug, stitch by stitch, forever. And that was The Blanket of 1,000 Hugs, a story sewn with love, one patch at a time. Forda, if you felt the warmth of Miri and Grandma's journey, don't forget to tap that like button. It helps us share more cozy stories with kids everywhere. And if you'd like to snuggle into even more magical tales, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell sauce so you never miss a bedtime moment. Thanks for watching, and remember, love, just like a blanket, is always big enough to share. Good night, dreamers.